Good evening, gentlemen. A lot of people have asked me questions on Ukraine, and I've been trying to give them answers. Ukraine, as you know, is the latest hotspot in the world. And recently, someone asked me, who started the war in Ukraine? And I asked him, can you tell me what you think about it? He said, the Russians started the war. They attacked Ukraine. But gentlemen, matter is not so simple. I am today going to discuss the genesis of the Ukraine conflict and how I will show you that it is America which instigated this Ukraine conflict for reasons to perpetuate the American hegemony over Europe. We look back to the year 1989. I think that was the period when the Soviet Union was fighting in Afghanistan. It was on its last legs, a mistake which had been committed by Leonid Brezhnev of getting entangled in Afghanistan. Well, the Russians had to retreat, but that retreat had a disastrous effect on their economy and the psyche of the Russians. Rather, at that time, it was the Soviet Union. And within a period of just 3 years, the Soviet Union broke up into 18 states. The once monolith Soviet Union, which was what you call the bulwark, the alternative to the Western world, had just ceased to exist. So, gentlemen, that's the genesis of the Ukraine conflict. The successor state was Russia, which was not strong at all. And it had a leader like Gorbachev. I mean, so many people tell me that he was a CIA agent, but I'll not say that. I will just say that he was a man who lacked foresight, he lacked mettle, he was not in the class of Joseph Stalin or Nikita Khrushchev, and the net result was he sold the Soviet Union away. Frankly, if you ask me, he should have been tried for treason. But then he got away and died a natural death. But of course, nobody remembers him in Russia now. Gentlemen, his successor was Boris Yeltsin. I mean, he was, I think, another incompetent man who had no dreams. But at that time, he knew Russia was weak. And he offered, or rather he wanted to join the NATO. Now here is the crucial point. At that time, Bill Clinton was the President of the United States, and the application came to him that Russia wanted to join NATO. The American think tank led by Clinton decided that they did not want Russia with them. They were looking far ahead, 20 years, 30 years. They needed a raison d'etre, some reason where the Americans could continue to be in Europe. They had to create a bugbear of fear in America, among the European nations, that they had a very dangerous and strong enemy who would eat them away. So they planned at that time to create Russia as an enemy. Clinton did not accept the application of Boris Yeltsin to join NATO. In fact, he gave him some assurances and told him, look, you don't really like to join us. Why should you join us? We'll look after you. We'll have détente. You live your way, we'll live our way. At the same time, he made an assurance that NATO would not expand its borders to the Russian border. And the former Russian states, which were satellites of the USSR, would not be incorporated into NATO. But by 1998, when Russia was weak, Clinton decided that the time had come to expand NATO. And he expanded NATO right to the Russian borders. Poland became a member, the Baltic states became members, and Russia was surrounded. The Russians couldn't do a thing. They were powerless at that time, or rather they were a lot of economic difficulties, and they didn't have a man of metal, someone who could hold the Russian state together and create what was the earlier Soviet Union. The Americans thus created the enemy in Russia. They want to tell the European powers, we are expanding up to Russia because ultimately Russia is the enemy and you all are not going to be safe with Russia there. So you better be members of NATO. We'll look after you. After all, we have Article 4 of the NATO Constitution, which says that an attack on any NATO power would be an attack on NATO. Well, gentlemen, Clinton went away and Bush came and the same policy continued. The American think tank had all decided that Russia would be the enemy. And the only country left out at that time was Finland, Sweden, and Ukraine. So the fear had to be created, and this they created by trying to make Ukraine a member of NATO. At that time, things had changed in Russia. The incompetent men like Yeltsin and Gorbachev had been sent home, and a new man had taken over, and his name is Vladimir Putin. The Americans probably thought that Putin is another pushover, but he was not. He was cast in the Stalinistic mold. He had been a member of the KGB. He was a colonel, I think, there. And he was put in the chair by Yeltsin once he was going away. Putin had grandiose dreams of making Russia a superpower again to rival America. And once he realized that NATO has expanded to the borders and they're going to make Ukraine, it became an exentialist crisis for Russia. If you go through the videos of John Mishmar of America, you will realize what a devious plan the Americans had made. The plan was to unite Europe against Russia, create Russia as an enemy, and see to it that Russia breaks up further into 4 to 5 states. That was the plan, gentlemen. And Russia had a lot of dissension at that time. There was a revolt on in Chechnya. There was unrest in so many places. And Vladimir Putin had his hands full. But he won. He won ultimately, united whatever was left of the Soviet Union, that is Russia. And then he had a big advantage because Russia has lots of minerals, oil and gas. It's self-sufficient and can export and live. Russia doesn't require any foreign trade or anything to survive, if survival is the word. The Americans now began to do devious things. They began to call Yeltsin to address the Senate. Zelensky, who was the president of the Ukraine, to address the American Senate. He was addressing the EU, and a bogey of a Russian threat was created. The East European countries were pretty scared of Russia, very scared. Why they are scared? Well, historically, if you look at it, they had been dominated by the Tsarist Empire. For example, Poland had been a part of the Tsarist Empire for decades, for a long time. Finland was also a part of the Tsarist Empire at one time. So these countries were very scared of Russia as it is. So all they needed was some oil to be put in the fire, so the fire grew up, and this is what was happening. And they got mighty scared of Russia when Russia was not a bogey. Russia was not a power at that time at any case, but Russia was building up because Vladimir Putin had realized that the time has come when Russia must exert and get its rights back. The Crimea was the first place where this problem started. The Crimea has for centuries been part of Russia. Nobody can deny that. During the days of the Soviet Union, a reorganization of states was done, and at that time, I think it was Khrushchev who transferred Crimea to Ukraine as a part of Ukraine. It was part of the reorganization because Ukraine was a part of the USSR. So it was supposed to be a one part of one state being given to another state, but everything was in Russia. But when the Soviet Union broke up, Ukraine went its separate way, and the Crimea went with Ukraine, which was something which the Russians couldn't accept. If you remember, the famous Crimean War, which was fought by the British against the Russians, and the battles at Sevastopol, and that famous poem by Lord Tennyson, "It's not to reason why, but to do and die," is about the Crimean War. Crimea was always a part of Russia, and Vladimir Putin engineered a coup and took over Ukraine. That was in 2014. The Americans probably would have acquiesced with it because immediately after that, in 2016, Donald Trump came into power. Now, he was a very realistic man, and he put the earlier policies on the back burner. He did meet Putin also. He was a forward-looking man. He even met President Kim of North Korea. So he was a different type of man. But at the same time, the American press and the right-wingers, a lot of them, the left-wingers, the Democrats, even the Justice Department decided that Donald Trump is not the man to rule us. He will sell us to the Russians. He's not going to do anything like that, I can tell you. But this was the bogey being created, and a Russian connection was invented at that time, and Trump could not normalize relations with Russia. Russia was looking for a reset of relations once Trump became president, but that didn't happen. And then, everybody knows what happened. Trump got defeated, or rather his defeat was engineered. He went away home, and Joe Biden became president. Now, Biden had already taken part in a very humiliating defeat in Afghanistan. And with 2024 election coming nearer, he needed some things to bolster up his standings. And he thought Ukraine is the best way. He was very lucky because he was able to plant a stooge in Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine, and that stooge was Zelensky. Zelensky has not realized that he has destroyed his country. Almost 8 to 10 million people are refugees floating around Europe. The country is in ruins, and he lost about 25% of his territory to the Russians in the last war. I'm not going to discuss the war here, gentlemen. I'm just saying how the war was engineered by the Americans. At the same time, the Americans were thinking that now we are winning because we have created the bogey of Russia as an enemy, and they created such a lot of fear that countries which had for years been neutral, like Sweden and Finland, wanted to join NATO. Because a false sense was created that there's an enemy and that is Russia, and look at the way they are going to gobble up Ukraine. So you better beware. So, gentlemen, this policy began to pay dividends as far as the Americans are concerned, and they wanted to incorporate Ukraine into NATO. That's a fact. And the aim was, once that was done, then they would have concentrated on Russia and tried to break away Chechnya and a few other states here and there to reduce Russia from being a European power to a power of no consequence, and the Americans, and that is the Anglo-Saxons, were true. Much of the support for the Americans came from the French and the British, who had lost their empires. Now, both these countries, I made a video earlier, they at one time were the dominating force in the world, but now they are non-entities. They've got no power, nothing. They're riding piggyback on the American horse. And if the Americans ride, they ride along with them. So, gentlemen, they were the powers who were fueling this, supporting America and spreading the fear in Europe that Russia is the enemy. And they were aided by this man, Zelensky, who went on talking all sorts of nonsense. You can go through his old speeches where he was talking of the Russian threat and this and that. And in that case, something was going to happen. He even in one speech, I remember holding up a paper and showing, this is a fast track application to join the EU and NATO. Nobody explained to him that why are you wanting to join NATO and what is NATO in any case. I'll discuss that also briefly. So NATO is basically a conglomeration of about 30 countries of Europe, including United States and Canada, and they want to create a global hierarchy where they can dominate the world. And they want associates, to join them, like India, so that the hegemony is complete. And I'm so glad that Mr. Modi has not fallen into the trap of the Americans. So the American aim was to continue to instigate Russia, hoping that Russia will not attack, will not fight, because it doesn't have any strong economy. But they were mistaken in the sense that Vladimir Putin now had no choice. I think he had no choice. If the Russians had sat back and Ukraine had become a member of the NATO, the phase 2 of the plan would have been put into action, wherein Russia would have been broken up into some more states. So somebody had to bell the cat, catch the bull by the horns, and Vladimir Putin did it, and he invaded Ukraine. He committed a lot of mistakes there. That's a different issue, but I'm not discussing the Ukraine conflict. I'm just letting you know, gentlemen, how the Ukraine conflict started and how the Americans engineered it. The aim was to finish off Russia, but they haven't succeeded. In fact, I can say they have failed. And as it stands now, I'll discuss it later, the war is not going in favor of the Americans. Russia is still surviving despite all the sanctions and having been taken out of the SWIFT banking system and all that. And they are so stupid, the Americans, that they even asked the international court to declare Vladimir Putin as a war criminal. I mean, even not Hitler, but they have done that. And now they are pressurizing people all over the world to ostracize the Russians. Don't talk to them. Boycott them. But two of the biggest countries in the world at the moment, China and Russia, and not China and India, are not doing the American line. Gentlemen, dreams die first. That's what Harold Robbins has written. I love his books. Wonderful writer. And this was the American dream, to finish off Russia by propping up Ukraine against it, but they failed. It's like Harold Robbins. The American dream is dead, and now Biden is a worried man. He may be talking a lot of bravado here and there, but he is worried because the war is now escalating, and very soon it could be World War III and the end of Western civilization. I will close now, gentlemen. I hope I made my points clear to you. You would have understood what I have said, what is the theme of my present video. I will close now and say goodbye. Jai Hind. Glory to India. And lastly, don't forget to subscribe to my channel, share it with your friends, like my videos, and come back for more. Goodbye and God bless. And let's hope, despite all the engineering which has been done by the Americans, World War III can be avoided. But I'm afraid, gentlemen, it's not going to happen that way. Bye-bye.